The sun hammered down on the fence line where Thomas Mercer stood, hammer in hand, sweat tracking through the dust on his face. The wood was splintered from last winter's wind. He'd been meaning to fix it for months. Now, finally, he had the time. Or maybe just the excuse to be outside, away from the silence that filled his house like something living. He set another nail, drove it clean through, and paused. A figure moved along the ridge road. Thomas squinted against the glare. It wasn't uncommon. Travelers passed through occasionally, following the old freight trail that skirted his property. But something about the way this one moved made him lower the hammer slowly. The figure walked unevenly, stumbling every few steps like the ground itself was working against them. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward the gate. As the figure drew closer, Thomas saw it was a woman. Young, maybe mid-20s. Her dress was torn along one sleeve, the fabric clinging to her in a way that suggested days of walking. Her hair hung loose and tangled, and her feet, God, her feet were bare, caked in dried blood and dirt. She stopped at the edge of his property line, swaying slightly. Her eyes lifted to his, and Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. She didn't speak, just stood there, trembling, her hands clutched around her own arms like she was holding herself together by force. "Ma'am?" Thomas took a step forward, keeping his voice low. "You all right?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first, then barely a whisper. "Can we just rest here 1 hour?" "We." Thomas's gaze dropped. Behind her, partly hidden by the folds of her torn skirt, was a child. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, clinging to the woman's leg. The child's face was streaked with tears and dust, her eyes wide and glassy with exhaustion. "Just 1 hour," the woman repeated, her voice cracking. "Please, we won't bother you. We'll sit by the fence. We can't walk anymore." Thomas felt his throat tighten. He'd seen desperation before. Seen people worn down by the road, by loss, by the world's indifference. But there was something else in this woman's eyes. Something that cut deeper than exhaustion. Fear. Not fear of him. Fear of something behind her. He glanced past her, down the ridge road. Empty. Nothing but dust and heat shimmer. But he could feel it too, suddenly. The weight of something unseen, something closing in. "Come on," Thomas said quietly, stepping aside and opening the gate. "More than an hour if you need it." The woman's knees nearly buckled. She caught herself on the fence post, nodding once, then twice, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The little girl whimpered and buried her face against her mother's side. Thomas led them to the porch, where a bench sat in the shade. The woman sank onto it, pulling the child into her lap, wrapping both arms around her. She didn't look at Thomas, just closed her eyes and breathed, slow and shaking. He brought water, then bread and cold meat from the kitchen. The woman ate like someone who'd forgotten how, small bites, pausing between each one as if waiting for permission. The little girl ate nothing, just clutched a scrap of cloth, maybe a doll, maybe just fabric, and stared at the horizon. "Where you headed?" Thomas asked after a while, crouching nearby, giving them space. The woman swallowed hard. "Anywhere. Anywhere's a long way to walk barefoot." She didn't answer. Thomas studied her face. There was a bruise along her jaw, faded yellow-green. Older, and on her wrist, just visible beneath the torn cuff of her sleeve, were marks, rope burns, recent. His stomach turned. Someone after you? Her eyes snapped to his, sharp and afraid. I didn't steal anything. I didn't ask if you did. She looked away, jaw tight. They'll say I did. Who's they? Silence. Thomas exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. He should have known better than to press. People on the run didn't talk. Not until they decided you were safe. And sometimes not even then. He stood, brushing dust from his knees. You can stay the night. Barn's got clean hay. I'll bring blankets. The woman's head jerked up. No, we can't. You can. You don't understand if they find us here. Then they find you rested and fed, not half dead on the side of the road. Thomas met her eyes steady. I'm not turning you out. She stared at him, something raw and broken flickering across her face. Then quietly, why? Thomas didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he had too many. All tangled up in ghosts he didn't like to name. Because 10 years ago, he said slowly, someone asked me the same thing, and I said no. The woman blinked. Her grip on the child tightened. I've regretted it every day since. He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving her on the porch with the water and the bread and the weight of his words hanging in the summer air. Behind him, the woman lowered her head, shoulders shaking. The little girl whispered something too soft to hear, and the sun burned on, indifferent and relentless, as it always had. By evening, the woman had moved into the barn. Thomas brought blankets, a lantern, and a basin of warm water. She thanked him in a voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it. The little girl still hadn't spoken. He didn't push. Just set everything down near the hay bales and left. But he didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the road. The darkness pressed in close, thick and breathing. Every creak of the fence, every rustle of wind through the grass made his hand tighten on the stock. Nothing came. By dawn, the woman was awake. He saw her through the barn door, kneeling beside the child, brushing the girl's hair with her fingers. Gentle, methodical, like it was the only thing holding her together. Thomas made coffee and brought 2 cups out to the barn. She looked up as he approached, eyes wary, but she took the cup. Thank you, she said again. Thomas nodded, sat down on an overturned crate nearby. You got a name? She hesitated. Then, Clara. Thomas. They sat in silence for a while, the child curled between them, half asleep. Can I ask you something? Clara said finally. Go ahead. 10 years ago, when someone asked you, who was it? Thomas stared into his coffee. The steam curled up between them, ghost-like. A man, he said quietly, and his son. They came through, same as you. Asked if they could camp on my land for the night. Said they were running. Clara watched him, still as stone. I told them no. Told them I didn't want trouble. Thomas's jaw tightened. They left. I went to bed, and the next morning I heard shots down the valley. The little girl stirred. Clara's hand moved to her back, soothing. Found them a mile out. Thomas continued, voice flat. Both of them. The boy couldn't have been more than 12. Clara closed her eyes. I buried them myself, Thomas said. Didn't even know their names. The silence stretched long and heavy. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. Don't be. I'm the one who should have. He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter now. But it did. It always had. Clara set down her cup. Her hands were shaking. The people chasing us. They're not going to stop. Who are they? Men who think they own us. Thomas's gaze sharpened. Owned. No. Clara's voice turned hard. Own. Present tense. He felt something cold crawl up his spine. 4 years ago, Clara said, staring at the hay beneath her feet. The war ended. Slavery ended. That's what they told us. But in some places, it didn't. Not really. They just changed the words. Called it contracts, indenture, debt, but it was the same chains, just made of paper instead of iron. Thomas's hands tightened around his cup. I worked a house in Grafton County, Clara continued. Me and my daughter. We were supposed to be free, but they said we owed. For food, for shelter, for the clothes on our backs, and the debt never went down, only up. That's illegal. Tell that to the judge who signed the contract. Clara's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut. Tell that to the sheriff who dragged me back the first time I ran. Thomas felt his stomach twist. I ran again 2 weeks ago, Clara said. Took Eliza in the middle of the night. We've been walking ever since. And they're still after you. They don't let go. Not ever. She looked at him then, eyes red-rimmed and fierce. So, if you want us gone, say it now. Because when they come, and they will, they won't care that you didn't know. They'll burn your house, shoot your animals, call you a thief and a traitor and worse. Thomas set down his cup, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. 10 years ago, he said slowly, I chose safety over what was right, and 2 people died because of it. Clara's breath hitched. I'm not making that choice again. She stared at him, something breaking open in her expression, relief and disbelief and fear all tangled together. You don't understand what you're... I understand plenty. They'll come with papers, legal papers. They'll say I'm a criminal. Then let them say it. Clara's voice cracked. Why would you do this? Thomas looked at her. Really looked. And that's when he saw it. The scar. A thin, pale line running from her temple to her cheekbone. Faded now, but unmistakable. His heart stopped. Clara, he said quietly. How old are you? She blinked, confused. 26. Where were you born? Grafton County. Why? Thomas's hands started to shake. You ever live near a place called Stone Creek? Her face went pale. How do you know that name? Because 10 years ago, Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. The man and the boy who asked me for help. They were running from Grafton County, too. Clara's breath caught. The boy said his sister got separated from them. Said she had a scar on her face from when their house burned down. Thomas's throat closed. Ben said her name was Clara. The barn went silent. Clara's hands flew to her face, covering her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. No, she whispered. No, no, no. I turned them away, Thomas said, his voice breaking. I sent your father and your brother back out into the night, and they died because of me. Clara's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the hay, sobbing, one hand clutching her daughter, the other pressed against her scar. Thomas knelt in front of her, shaking. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Clara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. And for a long moment, she said nothing. Then her voice raw and trembling. You think that makes it better? No. You think saying sorry brings them back? No. She glared at him, grief and rage burning in her eyes. Then what the hell are you trying to do? Give you what I couldn't give them, Thomas said. A place to stand. Clara's anger seemed to falter. Not gone, just cracked. She looked down at her daughter, then back at him. "They'll come," she whispered. "I know. And you'll fight, if I have to." Clara closed her eyes, nodded once, and outside, in the distance, the sound of hoofbeats began to echo across the valley. The horses came just after noon, 3 of them, moving slow and deliberate along the ridge road. Thomas saw them from the porch, their silhouettes dark against the sun-bleached sky. He set down the knife he had been sharpening and stood, rifle already in hand. Clara stepped out of the barn, Eliza clutched against her chest. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. "Hey, it's them," she said. Thomas didn't answer, just watched the riders descend. They moved like men who knew they had the law on their side. No hurry, no fear. Just the slow, inevitable approach of authority unchallenged. The lead rider was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff, or something close enough. His face was weathered, his eyes cold and flat. Behind him rode 2 others, younger, leaner, hands resting easy on the pistols at their hips. They stopped at the gate. The sheriff tipped his hat, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon." Thomas didn't move. "Afternoon. Name's Dalton, sheriff of Grafton County." He gestured casually toward the barn. "Got a report of stolen property in the area. Woman and a child. You seen anyone fitting that description?" Thomas's grip tightened on the rifle. "Depends. On what? On what you mean by property?" Dalton's smile didn't falter. "Now, friend, don't make this difficult. I got legal papers right here." He patted his saddlebag. "Signed by a judge. This woman's under contract. She ran. That makes her a thief. She's a person. She's a criminal." "That's not what the law says." "The law says what I say it says." Dalton's voice hardened. "Now step aside." Thomas raised the rifle, slow and steady, until it pointed at the sheriff's chest. "No." The 2 younger men stiffened, hands moving toward their guns. Dalton held up a hand, stopping them. He studied Thomas with a kind of cold amusement. "You know who I am, friend. I know you're on my land without permission. I'm the law. I don't need permission. The war ended 4 years ago, Sheriff. Slavery's illegal. So are the contracts you're hiding behind." Dalton's smile finally faded. "You got a lot of opinions for a man standing alone. I'm not alone. You got her." Dalton jerked his chin toward Clara. "And a little girl who can't even talk. That what you're betting on?" Thomas said nothing. Dalton leaned forward in his saddle, eyes narrowing. "I know you, don't I?" Thomas's stomach dropped. "Yeah," Dalton said slowly, like he was savoring the recognition. "You're Mercer. Used to run cattle through Grafton County. 10 years back, wasn't it?" Thomas didn't answer. "Funny thing," Dalton continued. 10 years ago, a man and his boy came through here. Runaway laborers. Had a contract just like this one." He tapped his saddlebag again. "I tracked them to your property line, asked around. You know what folks told me?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "They said you turned them away." Dalton's grin returned, sharp and cruel. "Sent them right back out onto the road, where I found them, and dealt with them." Clara's breath hitched behind him. "So don't stand there," Dalton said, his voice dropping to a hiss. "And tell me about the law. You didn't care about the law then. You just didn't want the trouble." Thomas felt the words land like blows. Dalton straightened in his saddle. "Now you got a choice, Mercer. You can hand over my property and I'll ride out of here. Or you can play hero, and I'll come back with 20 men and burn this place to ash. Your call." Thomas didn't lower the rifle. Dalton sighed. "Suit yourself." He turned his horse, motioning to the others. They followed, slow and unhurried, back toward the ridge. But as they reached the crest, Dalton looked back. "I'll give you till sundown to reconsider. After that, we're coming in, and we won't be asking nice." Then they were gone. Thomas lowered the rifle, his hands shaking. Clara stepped forward, her voice raw. "You should have let me go." "No, he's going to kill you." "Maybe. Then why?" "Because 10 years ago, I let your family die." Thomas turned to face her, eyes burning. "I'm not doing it again." Clara stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she looked down at Eliza, who clung to her skirt, silent and wide-eyed. "I won't let her watch you die too," Clara whispered. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen." Clara's laugh was bitter. "How? You're one man. They'll bring an army." Thomas looked toward the ridge, where dust still hung in the air. "Then we find another way." "There is no other way. There's always another way." Clara shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You don't understand. Men like Dalton, they don't stop, they don't forgive, they just take and take until there's nothing left." Thomas met her eyes. "Then we don't give them the chance." He walked back into the house, mind racing. Clara stood on the porch, holding her daughter, staring at the horizon. And the sun crawled toward the west, burning its way toward sundown. The house was quiet as Thomas rummaged through the back room. He pulled open drawers, rifled through old papers, looking for something, anything that could help. Clara appeared in the doorway, Eliza asleep in her arms. "What are you doing?" "Looking for the deed, property records, something to prove Dalton doesn't have jurisdiction here." "You think papers will stop him?" "No, but they might slow him down." Clara watched him for a moment, then stepped inside. She set Eliza down gently on a worn blanket in the corner, tucking her in. The child didn't stir. "She hasn't spoken since we ran," Clara said quietly. Thomas paused, glancing over. "Not at all. Not a word." Clara's voice cracked. "She used to sing, all the time. Little songs she'd make up, about birds and flowers and—" She trailed off, wiping her eyes. "Now there's just silence." Thomas set down the papers he'd been holding. "She'll speak again, when she feels safe." "She'll never feel safe. Not as long as they're out there." "Then we make sure they're not." Clara laughed, but it was hollow. "You keep saying that, like you can just will it into happening. Someone has to." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why are you doing this?" "I told you why." "No. You told me you feel guilty. That's not the same thing." Thomas exhaled slowly, sat down on the edge of the desk. 10 years ago, I was a coward. I let fear make my choices, and because of that, 2 people died." He looked at her. "Your father, your brother." Clara's throat tightened. "I don't remember much about them," she said quietly. "Just pieces. My father's voice. The way my brother used to pull my hair and laugh." She smiled faintly. "I was 13 when we got separated. They told me they'd come back, that they'd find me. They tried. I know." Her voice broke. "And you sent them away." "I did. And now you want forgiveness." "No." Thomas shook his head. "I don't. I don't deserve it." Clara blinked, surprised. I'm not doing this to make myself feel better, Thomas said. I'm doing it because it's the only thing I can do. It won't bring them back. It won't undo what I did. But maybe it keeps someone else from dying. Clara stared at him, something raw and painful twisting in her chest. You think one good act erases the bad? She whispered. No, but it's still worth doing. She looked away, blinking hard. I hate you for what you did. I know. I hate that they're dead and you're alive. I know. And I hate that I need you now. Thomas nodded slowly. I know. Clara's shoulders shook. She pressed her hands to her face, sobbing quietly. I'm so tired. I know. She sank down onto the floor, back against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. I just want it to stop, all of it. I want to wake up and not be running. I want my daughter to speak again. I want... She trailed off, voice breaking. I want my family back. Thomas knelt beside her. Didn't touch her. Just sat there, close enough that she wasn't alone. They're still with you, he said quietly. Your father, your brother. They'd want you to survive, to fight. They'd want you to burn, Clara shot back, voice sharp. Maybe, probably. Thomas met her eyes, but they'd want you safe more. Clara looked at him, tears streaming down her face, and for a long moment she said nothing, then barely audible. I can't forgive you. I'm not asking you to. But I can't let her lose another person either. Thomas nodded. Then we make sure she doesn't. Clara's anger seemed to crack again. She looked over at Eliza, sleeping peacefully in the corner, and something softened in her expression. She looks like him, Clara whispered. My brother. Same eyes. Thomas followed her gaze. Then we keep her safe. For him. Clara closed her eyes, nodded. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the past pressing down around them. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. And somewhere in the distance, hoofbeats began to echo again. Clara's head snapped up. They're coming. Thomas stood, grabbing the rifle. Stay inside. Keep her quiet. Where are you going? To meet them. Thomas. He looked back at her. If something happens to me, there's a horse in the barn. Ride north. Don't stop. I'm not leaving you. You will if you have to. Clara's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Thomas stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, and waited. The hoofbeats grew louder, and the sun sank toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. They came as the last light bled from the sky, but they didn't come alone. Thomas saw them first, Dalton and his 2 men, riding hard down the ridge. But behind them, something else. More riders, 5, 6, no, 8. His heart sank. Then one of the trailing riders broke away from Dalton's group, veering toward Thomas's fence line, and Thomas recognized him. Old Billy Carson owned the ranch 3 miles west. Another rider followed, then another. Thomas's breath caught. They weren't with Dalton. They were following him. Dalton reined up hard at the gate, eyes blazing. I warned you, Mercer. But before Thomas could answer, Billy Carson's voice cut through the dusk. Gid Mercer didn't come home this afternoon, Dalton. The sheriff turned, scowling. This ain't your business, Carson. His horse came back without him. Billy rode up slow, flanked by 2 others, men Thomas recognized from town. We came looking. Dalton's jaw tightened. I said, This ain't. We heard you the first time. Another man rode forward. Hank Baller, the blacksmith. But when a man's horse comes home alone and there's a county sheriff on his land with guns drawn, we figure it's worth checking on. Dalton's hand moved toward his pistol. Wouldn't, Billy said calmly. Not unless you want to explain to 8 witnesses why you shot a rancher on his own property. The 2 younger men with Dalton exchanged nervous glances. Dalton glared at Billy, then at Thomas. This woman's a criminal. I got papers. Let's see them, Hank said. Dalton hesitated. Go on, Billy pressed. If you got legal cause, show it. Slowly, Dalton pulled a folded document from his saddlebag and tossed it toward Hank. Hank caught it, unfolded it, and read. His expression darkened. This is a labor contract. That's right. Indentured servitude contract. Post-war, Grafton County. Hank looked up, eyes hard. These are illegal, Dalton. Have been since '65. Judge signed it. Don't care if the devil himself signed it. Hank crumpled the paper and tossed it back. It's not worth the ink. Dalton's face flushed. You're interfering with the law. No, Billy said quietly. We're upholding it. For a long moment, Dalton sat there, trembling with rage. Then he yanked his horse around. You're all going to regret this. Maybe, Billy said. But not today. Dalton spurred his horse and rode hard back toward the ridge, his 2 men scrambling to follow. The group of ranchers watched them go, silent and steady. When the hoofbeats faded, Billy turned to Thomas. You all right, Gid? Thomas exhaled, feeling the weight lift from his chest. Yeah, thanks, Billy. Don't thank me. Thank Clara May. She came tearing into town an hour ago, said you were about to get yourself killed. Billy grinned. Figured we'd better come see. Thomas turned. Clara stood on the porch, Eliza in her arms, watching. He walked over slowly. You rode into town. You told me to run north if something happened. Clara's voice was shaky but firm. I decided something was about to happen, so I ran south instead. Found help. Thomas stared at her. That was stupid. Probably. Could have gotten you caught. I know. Could have gotten you killed. Clara met his eyes. So could staying here and doing nothing. Thomas's throat tightened. He nodded. Thank you. Clara looked away, swallowing hard. Don't. Just don't. Billy and the others rode up to the porch, tipping their hats. Ma'am. Clara nodded, clutching Eliza closer. You need a place to stay, Hank said. My wife's got room. Kids'll keep yours company. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I don't have money. Didn't ask for any. Hank smiled. Just asked if you needed a place. Clara covered her mouth, nodding. Billy glanced at Thomas. You good here? Yeah, I'm good. All right then. Billy turned his horse. Come on, boys. Let's get home before our wives start wondering. The group rode off, their laughter fading into the evening. Thomas and Clara stood on the porch, the silence settling around them. I still can't forgive you, Clara said quietly. I know. But, she hesitated. Thank you for not turning us away. Thomas nodded. I'm sorry I ever did. Clara looked at him, something soft and broken in her expression. Then she turned and carried Eliza toward the barn. Thomas watched her go, the weight of the past pressing down, but lighter now, not gone, just shared. 3 weeks later, Clara and Eliza moved into Hank Baller's house. Eliza started speaking again, just a word here and there at first, then more. She sang in the mornings. Clara found work mending clothes and helping at the general store. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it was real. Thomas visited once a week, bringing vegetables from his garden. They didn't talk much, just sat on the porch watching the valley, the past hovering between them like smoke. One evening, as Thomas stood to leave, Clara stopped him. "My father used to say something," she said quietly. "He'd say, 'The hardest thing a man can do is live with what he's done. The bravest thing he can do is try to do better.'" Thomas looked at her, throat tight. "I think," Clara continued, voice soft, "he'd have wanted me to tell you that." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. Clara turned and went inside, and Thomas walked home through the twilight, the weight still there, but something else too. Not forgiveness, not redemption, but a chance. A small, fragile chance to be better than he had been. Years later, when Eliza was grown, she would tell her own children the story of the rancher who said yes when the world had taught him to say no. She would tell them about her mother's strength, her father's memory, her uncle's sacrifice, and she would tell them about second chances, how rare they were, and how fiercely they had to be fought for. The land remembered. The wind carried the voices of the past, and in the valley where Thomas Mercer had once turned away a father and son, a new story took root. A story of courage, of community, of the slow, painful work of becoming someone you could live with. The sun set, the seasons turned, and the West, as it always had, kept moving forward.